So what you're saying sounds good, but if I'm already overwhelmed in my day to day, like if I mean there are kids currently in the border who are locked in cages, and I'm just to be thinking about what robots might be doing tomorrow. Like how does all that work? How does all that work?
The beauty of this is that you have a choice as to what you want to focus on. The key is first and foremost. The key is recognizing whose idea of the future it is that you're creating.
Mm-hmm.
Well, because most of us are creating some other guy's idea of the future.
Right.
And, we have very real needs today. We have very real issues, kids at the border, locked in cages. What do you do about that?
Yeah.
Unless you go down there and have some type of mission where you're going to, break them out or whatever it might be, feel helpless to actually, create the kind of change that needs to take place there.
Yeah.
So the key here is to first step back and recognize where you are right now. Mm-hmm. And then to ask yourself why you feel the way you do about certain things. This is all about understanding narratives, about understanding stories, because it's really about becoming much more self-aware. Why do I feel the way I do? Why do I respond this way? Why does this here trigger anger or fear or whatever it might be? Mm-hmm. We first have to almost sit with that overwhelm.
Yeah.
Because once we can get really clear on that, then we can start to say, how do we make sure that this doesn't happen again? Because the reality is that there's nothing you can do right now, like actually go to open that door and get those kids out of the cages.
Right.
And I think that's the problem is that people say, well, if I can't do that, then there's nothing I can do.
But I can't do anything. Yeah.
You can help to make sure it doesn't happen again by
Right. And one thing I appreciate about a strategic foresight mindset is that it can tie together things that we don't necessarily think of as going together. Yeah. So to take the two, on the surface, very different things we just discussed, kids locked in cages and facial recognition software, if we're looking even at the early signals of change right now, we realize that, say, Amazon is creating facial recognition software for Homeland Security that they're using that interfaces with social media, and they're actively scanning for people that they think might not belong here. Mm-hmm. And that is a particular vision of the future that is being promoted by particular interests. Yeah. And so in my judgment, that's a totalitarian future that I'm not super thrilled about supporting. So to recognize these early signals of change, to recognize the signs of the times, means that I can get the tools to potentially create an alternative future vision that is more compelling for me and those I care about.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I think that's a great example. You're taking two things and you're putting them together, and what you're talking about is creating future context. So much of what we do is, in the way that we view the future, is outside of a context that makes sense, because there's an underlying assumption that, well, we don't know what the future is going to be, so we can make our best guess based on past actions and where we are right now. Mm-hmm. But the beauty of foresight is that, no, you can actually anticipate what the future might look like, not just one, but several, by putting those two things together. Mm-hmm. And then asking yourself, how might people respond? In the faith community, right? What does Christianity look like in a facial recognition world, that's more totalitarian? Like, what role does it take on? Christianity, any religion, they morphed and changed with the times. Right. Sometimes they're rebellious, sometimes they're compliant. These are the things that people want to, if you can envision that before it happens, then you can influence the direction. That is the real power in this. Mm-hmm. You create a powerful vision of what the future might be and what it might not be. Yeah. And then you can get involved in influencing it before it becomes public policy and raising awareness. That's the beauty of today. With social media and everything else, you can get a message out like that. Yeah. If you knew how to communicate a powerful vision of the future you want to see, the possibilities that could come from that are just immense. Mm-hmm. And doing it in a proactive way, where you are influencing the discussion before it ever gets to Washington, D.C. As much as people hate D.C., the reality is that they can accelerate or slow down innovation in a heartbeat. I mean, I'm there 4 times a year, and it's just like you start to realize that's a machine that they may move slow, but they still hold the power. Right.
So, yeah, and so many of the progressive Christian faith communities I'm a part of are on the front lines of change making, are working with being a witness to those who are being rounded up in like ICE detention centers, and are doing so much to be on the ground and do good work. But I still think that we fall into the malaise that I think religious communities of all stripes do, where we're 5 to 10 years behind the times, as opposed to like we're just barely catching up with Snapchat or the ravages of climate change. And so what I hear you saying is that it's possible for people in these kind of activist and faith-based leadership communities to use these tools to actually be ahead of the curve for once.
Yeah, absolutely. And what's funny is a number of people that have gone through, that I've worked with, that have gone through the Foresight Academy, that they come from a faith. Their whole focus is how do we, we're losing members. We need to rethink our value. We need to rethink what it is we're doing. I keep finding myself back into this loop. So at some point, probably, but that's the question, right? Is how do we remain relevant? How does the message remain relevant in a world that's changing so fast?
Yeah.
And but I think it's because so much of, and you tell me what you think. I mean, obviously my perspective being a chaplain's kid growing up in this, we've been an intentional community together, is that there is a holding on to what was, right? I mean, even in our intentional communities, it was, what did they do in the first century?
Right. Yeah. We were part of this house church community where we were inspired by our reading of the witness of the first century church, and therefore we lived in neighborhoods together. We had open participatory gatherings. We didn't have any set designated paid clergy. We tried to practice, equality amongst men and women in our communities, and it was a lot of fun. And as you're pointing out, they were so it was very backward looking primarily in terms of let's go to the sources for inspiration. Yeah. And honestly, I think there's value in going to the sources for inspiration. And I think there's value in living in the present moment, the sort of strain of Jesus' teaching of take no thought for tomorrow. There's a specific thing he's addressing there about being radically present to what's right now. Yeah. But then there's also that sense of being wise as serpents and innocent as doves. And I think that implicitly involves an anticipatory dimension where we're looking at what is on the horizon and just being wiser about that route, because if we're not being wise about it, we're being reactionary about it. We're just like a pinball going through a pinball machine as opposed to, I don't know, whatever would be more proactive ball.
You and I've known each other too long. I think we get easy to come up with stuff that's like, oh, cut. No, I think that's exactly right. Is that there's definitely value going to the sources, right? But we have to say, again, this goes back to how to think, not what to think, right? When people come to me and say, Jared, what's the future of this? What's the future of that? And obviously, if you have futurist in your title, people are going to assume that you have some type of inclination.
And some futurists do that. They make a career making various predictions and trends, and some are really good at it, and some are really awful at it. But it's still like giving people fish versus teaching you how to fish.
What good is it if I take you to the future and then leave you there? I've done nothing for you except maybe freak you out or entertain you. But that's the difference, right, between strategic foresight and just trend projection. But absolutely, we have to step back and have a holistic view of everything. We have to recognize, because context is the key word. If we know how to think about something, it means that we're taking into account what's the foundation, and then where are we right now, and then how do we build going forward. But instead of saying we're right here right now and let's project what we believe right now into the future, the beauty of foresight is instead it's like, no, let's go stand in that future and work backwards. So it's a difference between strategic planning and strategic foresight, right? And the two work well together, but a lot of strategic planning is based on what you know and what you've already accomplished. Well, we were successful last year. So this year, in order to be successful, we need to increase what we've already done. And then we need to hope for the best into the future.
Right.
Well, in a rapid rate of change, that doesn't really suffice. And that's why so many strategic plans maybe get done and put up on a shelf. Right. They're like a quarterly basis. So it doesn't work. But instead, if you start to envision how the future might unfold and where it is that you want to be, and then most importantly, how the people that you serve fare in that future, now you have something to work with.
Yes.
Now you have something to work with and work back and say, well, how do we get here? Because you have to be able to tie it back to the present day. Just like you talked about facial recognition on Facebook, or we have to be able to tie it back to here. Because once you do that, now you can inspire people to work towards that because they believe they can.